terrific newspaper, but I was left feeling I don't know enough about what they know to make that statement. There was a certain logic in what they said when they said, you know, the troops feel more united by a common enemy, but beyond that, I found myself having the same question about that.
Mr. Brill, I found your speech a very important one. I think that criticism of media is part of the responsibility, perhaps, of all of us, but certainly it's wonderful to know a magazine that is doing this. I would like to ask you if media is suffering in many communities because there is only one newspaper to report the news.
Can't imagine what you're referring to, but sure, that hurts. I mean, you know, it's a complicated answer because you can, a lot of the ills that we see, a lot of the bad stuff we see in the press, people ascribe to the feverish competition. In other words, people racing to get scoops, and therefore they put all this irresponsible stuff on the air. And that's certainly in the first weeks of the Monica Lewinsky scandal, when people were tripping all over themselves just to take any leak, any morsel of a leak from Ken Starr and just go live with it. That was the case, and one of the causes was competition. Therefore, one would think that if you have an environment where you're the big newspaper in town and you don't have any competition, you can take sort of the longer, more responsible view of things. But it doesn't seem to work out that way often, and often another kind of problem seeps in, and that is because you're the one newspaper in town, you can be too entrenched and too much and too responsive to the major business interests in town, with no countervailing pressure to go do great stories, because no one else is going to do those stories and embarrass you. One of the things that tempers that a little bit, and is starting to temper it a lot, is the emergence of alternative newspapers, weekly newspapers, community newspapers as a real economic and journalistic force in many communities around the country. But by and large, you know, newspapers would say to you, hey, gee, you know, you might think everything's great because we don't have any competition vis-a-vis newspapers, but we've got all this other competition. We don't have any competition, and we're still losing readers. Now, I would say the answer to that is to do a better newspaper.
Mr. Brill, I knew I'd get several surprises coming here today, and one certainly was finding out that Dick Pogue is a fan of aggressive, independent, investigative journalism. So,
I actually, that's a funny point, but the point I was trying to make, apparently unsuccessfully, was that despite the fact that he's not a fan of that, he's a good person.
More to the point, I'm glad the last question really led into what I was going to ask you, and I'm not sure you've really addressed this in Brill's content too much. Other publications have. The alternatives certainly have been a real vibrant, as you mentioned, alternative. As you know, around the country now, what's been happening is that there's been kind of a chaining of the alternatives.
Yeah.
And in Cleveland, we have a really unusual situation here where we're one of only 2 cities in the country, along with L.A., where both of the chains really actually are here competing head-to-head. Wonder if you might, certainly in terms of story ideas, that's something to dig into, but wonder what your thoughts are on that.
It's inevitably good, but again, you know, competition, as a general matter, competition is a good thing. It's supposed to produce higher quality products. Competition in journalism often produces something that is faster and gets more attention, but isn't necessarily of higher quality. In the long run, and it's hard for a lot of businesses to take the long run view, but if you look at journalism, if you look at newspapers, the highest quality newspapers in this country, if you did your own list of the 4 or 5 highest quality major newspapers in this country, that list would probably look like the list you would do of the 4 or 5 most valuable, most profitable newspapers, just in terms of equity value in this country. Because on that list, for example, might be the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and then on the list of the high-quality ones, they'd probably be on that list too. So long-term, newspapers that do the right thing, or at least try more than others to do the right thing, I think end up winning the race in the marketplace. I think that I also think that local newspapers are really missing a trick. I mean, to my mind, the one media entity left that has a chance to become the real core communications vehicle, the real core media entity that unites people living in the same place, that they turn to because they trust the editor and trust the information given about local news and local politics and local culture and art, that a newspaper that takes a really tough, independent tack and really thinks of itself that way as having this really special responsibility and special opportunity is going to be increasingly valuable in a society where all the rest of the media is just fragmented.
Mr. Brill, turning to the TV news magazines, the 20/20, 60 Minutes, where they for 20 minutes berate somebody, some offender, and then at the end of it they say, well, we asked them to respond and they said no comment. And of course the reason they did that is because if they did comment, they'd cut and paste it together in such a way to serve their purpose. So the question is, how does one get proper responses from those that are alleged to be the offenders?
Well, one of the things we're doing is again, with this complaint board we have set up on our website, and we've also started sending out questionnaires to people who are covered in news stories and newspapers and all around the country and in magazine shows, asking them that question. Were you treated fairly? Were your quotes accurate or taken in context or out of context?